Brian O'Driscoll on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
Having a conversation.
Right, here we go. Brian O'Driscoll's with us this Friday afternoon. How are you?
Hey, good.
We'll talk about the Pro 14 and we'll talk a bit about the provinces because obviously we haven't had John since the start of the competition's gone very well for them. But I do want to just kind of round out, maybe for the last time, to talk about Joe Schmidt, certainly for now. He was in with us in studio last Monday and I got to learn a little bit about his coaching philosophies in a way. It's actually the first time I'd done a proper sit-down long interview with him, and it's only in those interviews where you actually get the opportunity to go, well, what are you trying to do? And in the book, there's a big, long section about coaching and how the contact area is the most important thing for him. And he learned this thing in a French coaching course about the ball carrier taking the ball into contact. It's 60% responsibility for what happens next. There's a 20% on the first person, and you're smiling at this.
It's 60% like, man.
Yeah. So
yeah, that's what he calls. Yeah. We had it drilled into us. It's something that I've used in my punditry.
Right.
You know, because it's funny. When you finish up, what's most reflective in the aftermath when you become a pundit is usually your most recent coach, or the coach that impacted you most. And I think for me it was him on both counts. You know, I was lucky that I had better coaches towards the end of my career rather than necessarily in the early part. But Joe brought some things to the table that I hadn't heard before, and as a result they're taglines that you end up genuinely believing and thinking can be the differential when you're analysing games. And I totally concur with him on that. That 60% man of that body fight, that ball placement and winning the ruck. The ruck is a key component. It's the most important component to the game of rugby. People will talk about set piece and about line out. And yes, you know, set piece is still vital. We saw in the World Cup final how important the scrum is. But if you can win the ruck one way or another, the knock-on effect is defensively, you slow it down and set line speed, and in attack, they don't have an opportunity to set line speed and you can just play, and that's how holes open up.
Yeah.
And you can tell between successful games and unsuccessful games, more often than not, are dictated on the speed of the ruck ball. And it becomes a very simplistic game.
And he talked about it, the imagery was a mackerel in a boat. You need to be really active when you're on the ground when you've got the ball, and the first person in has 20% responsibility, the second person in has 20% responsibility as well. And there was a Graham Henry quote about it being the heartbeat of the game. So he was like, look, that is my coaching philosophy. And there's a brilliant, really interesting part in the book where somebody comes up to him and says, I was watching great coverage on Setanta. So it's obviously when he was coaching Leinster, it was like, they were telling me all about your offload game. And he laughed and he went, we don't even practice offloads because we're all about making sure that we win the contact area, and after you win the contact area, things fall into place. I thought that was it was interesting, considering the criticism of the team was we're not very good at offloading, and it's not something we practice. I was surprised to see the bit we don't practice offloads. Did you guys practice offloads?
No. Like if you look at the Leinster team of the early 2010s, I think it was great coaching it was of that time too, where those power plays were unheard of and hadn't been seen before.
Yeah.
And we were able to catch lots of teams on the back of that. But even if we didn't manage to catch them on a power play, you look at that back line, you know, we'd Chris Whitaker, you know, an Aussie scrum half, Johnny just breaking through, who was, you know, emerged as this potential superstar, Gordon, myself, Shane Horgan, Luke Fitzgerald, Rob Carney, and or Gervin Dempsey, like a lot of a lot of football there.
Yeah,
a lot of players that were able to play heads up. So
you didn't need to.
So the phase play and the offloading was just part of our game prior to Joe coming in.
Yeah,
and that's why that's why people talk about some great rugby being played back in those days, because I don't think he necessarily needed to coach it. And then maybe the structures came in, and he is quite a structured coach, and he brought that aspect in, and then other teams started working it out, and maybe the focus was taking away from the necessity to offload. Like you look at Ireland over the course of the last number of years have been a low offloading team, but yet have huge numbers of rucks. Means, you know, you have to get through an awful lot more work to actually generate your scores. And
We kind of ran out of time, so I didn't get to ask it at the end of it. They were kind of saying, come on, he's about to do 3 big shows where he's probably going to tell everybody about this, and they want to sell tickets. So the people from the book, they were great with their time, but they're like, come on, let's go. I did want to ask, like, at some point do you see your philosophy evolving to the point where you're not looking for the contact, where actually you're trying to avoid the contact, so you have fewer rucks?
But that is most in every coach's manual. I don't think, there's not many coaches who would say, if I need a hole, make a hole for me by running through someone. It's much easier, and coaches at a young age talk about the simplicity of running to the branches of the tree rather than the trunk.
Yeah.
Again, running to the arms of the defender because you're going to be at your weakest point the further out you are, similar to any branch of a tree. So that's where the obvious offload will be generated from running there rather than running into the trunk.
Okay, I get that, right? But if you spend all the time, the philosophy is to be the best at contact and breakdown because it's the heartbeat of the game, and that's the thing we're practicing and practicing and practicing and practicing. Is it possible you forget to do the other stuff? That you're conditioned that the be-all and end-all is to be the best 60% person you can be, and that is, in your belief, is going to win the game. So, in a way,
maybe it was taken for granted that would evolve, and it didn't, and it just shows that it is a part of the game that absolutely needs focus. But I also think over the course of Joe's tenure, from coming into Leinster in 2010 to leaving a couple of months last month, there's been a big evolution of the game as well as where it goes. The game goes through different cycles where there's a real focus on defence and kicking game, on physicality, on being lean and your anaerobic and anaerobic capacity and so on. So it goes through these different cycles every 2-3 years, and I think that cycle ended. It's hard to say exactly when, because we had some success with it as recently as a year ago against the All Blacks. So
it might have been the summer, and we were just at the last tail of it.
So I just think with analysis and how teams now, particularly when you get to the top of the tree or close to the top of the tree, people give you more respect, give you more time in the team room before they go out to training and before they know exactly how they're going to defend. They have an idea of what plays you're going to throw at them, and certain teams started working us out. For instance, England, don't know if I've said this here before, England realised that don't go after the ruck for the first 4 phases because there's a strike play coming in phase 3 or 4. Right. So if you don't go near the ruck, you've got maximum bodies on your feet. You've got 14 probably in the front, certainly 13 in the front line and maybe 2 in the backfield. So wait for the strike play, knock that down, and then there might be something to be had in phases 5, 6, and 7. And that's what happened. Tom, Curry came in. Was Underhill playing in that game? Well, certainly Curry had a field day against us. He got 2 or 3 turnovers, but you'll find that none of them were on phases 1, 2, 3, or 4.
Right.
It was after that, and they were patient and let it unfold because they felt as though our multi-phase wasn't something nearly as potent as our strike plays. And they were right, because there wasn't as much of a focus on multi-phase. In fact, very little focus. It seemed that the launch plays were everything. And when teams nullified us in that regard, it felt as though you just became a bit stagnant and had to kick the ball away.
Yeah, and I suppose that's when the style looks terrible, because it's not making the inroads that it used to make. And that's what our memory is going to be for the last 12 months, is that performance against England in Lansdowne Road. The only other thing that I want to talk about briefly from the book before we move on.
Before we do move on, so the other thing as well is the phase play that we haven't been practicing evolves when you win the ruck.
Yeah.
Like we won against New Zealand, so that's a perfect example. Or other games where we've had big success, England over in Twickenham. When you win the ruck, you don't have to think about setups. You're just playing. And Johnny's great at doing that, of dictating play. And when teams are on the back foot, the back foot is everything. Where it's when you have to set up your pods and get organised and you get overly structured and you're slowing the ruck ball down even more because you're not set up. That is my pet peeve. If it's there, play it. Because if you're not ready, they're certainly not ready. And scrum halves that slow it down and wait for their pod of 3 and, we've got to get into our structures, pod of 3, and then one back out the back of that to then link to 2 forwards with another back outside that. We're not set up for all of that yet. How long is that? 3, 4, 5, 6 seconds. Defensive line sets, get their spacings, come off the line, easy. So as soon as it's ready there, whether you're ready or not, pick and go, feed it forward. Scrum half can be a support runner, because the defensive lines, that's where you get mispatches, that's where you get players coming in, uncertainty, and uncertainty is everything in defence. When you're trying to attack, players not lining up, knowing who they have, is a dream situation, and that only happens from quick ruck ball. So that's why Ireland's phase attack looked really good against New Zealand, is because of the speed of their ruck ball. They weren't looking at trying to get into their pods or their shape too much. They were just playing, and they were looking up and identifying fractures in the defensive system or mismatches, and they just played. Whereas I think we became very focused on trying to get into our pods, and this is the way we need to play, rather than just playing with speed, at pace. And no defensive system in the world can do that if they don't have a chance to set.
Why do you think that happened?
I don't know. I think maybe there was just, they had it drilled into them, that's what we needed to do, and went away from the reactive stuff. It became formulaic, and rather than being able to just go, right, this is what we do. If you look at sides at the moment now, how often number 10s are playing behind the ruck and 15s are playing behind the ruck, because they're keeping their options open. And it's those late sweeps are the things that create what looks like a 3-on-3 into a 5-on-3 or a 4-on-3.
Yeah, you become
bang, bang, bang.
A running back.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what teams are looking at now.
Yeah.
And players working hard to get off the ground and run in, and running in late. The whole thing is about running in late, because what I say about a defensive, I'm at a defensive line, I'm thinking about my zone, and all of a sudden you're mapping up, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, maybe a full back closing, okay, we're in good shape. The last minute you see someone trailing around the back, there's an uncertainty, and that's all you need in defence is uncertainty, because if you're not sure, then either side of you aren't sure as well, and you won't get them every time, but occasionally you'll pick someone off, and that's why sides that are making decisions late, that's why there's nothing worse than setting up to show a move that you've done in the past and set up in that exact formation, because players are going, okay, we've seen this on the video before. So set up something different, and then all of a sudden shift in as the ball goes into the scrum or into the line. You shift into the setup of what you're comfortable with.
Yeah, you can imagine how happy England were to see the strike moves coming after the fourth play. When they're like, this is great. This is exactly what we did. And
then they're set. They got their spacings perfectly aligned. They came off the line. They weren't thinking of drifting. And then all of a sudden you run out of options and you kick the ball. And then you're not kicking on your terms. You're kicking on their terms. Yeah. Because you got to get rid of it, because you're running out of steam. You're running out of a bit of energy. You're going backwards. And so the right thing to do is kick it and then play a bit of defence.
None of that seems unfixable by a new organisation, and it is a new organisation. Mike Catt's coming in, and you've got a head coach who's a head coach for the very, very first time. So, clearly the players are all very capable. It's just a few tweaks to go, right, what are you guys going to do for us here today?
Yeah, I think there'll be change in there. I think I get the impression that the environment stagnated as well, and it needs refreshing. And listen, don't get me wrong, Joe has been absolutely phenomenal what he's done, but I think there's sell-by date on all coaches, and I, looking at the past, I remember thinking to Michael Cheika, he did 5 years with us, and we're sad to see him go, but at the same time, I think it was the time. 5 is really, it's hard to continue to evolve and change things and come up with new concepts after that period of time. And in fairness, I was still enjoying listening to what he had to say, but it felt as though it needed change. And listen, Joe managed to stay in the job for 6 years. Did it feel, if you look back on the last year, did it feel as though a year too long? Probably. Because there wasn't that next level of evolution as the game shifted as well, coming into a World Cup year.
Yeah, and look, maybe the year out of the game will actually do him no harm to go off and see what everybody else is doing and have a little bit of that. And
I'll be intrigued to see whether he looks for feedback himself from the IRFU as to what their report, post World Cup report, the findings come up with, whether he's part of that, whether he goes to sit down with the relevant individuals, David Nusafora, and find out from his own perspective as to where the feeling is that maybe, he missed out or he missed the mark on certain things, because you could be sure that if it's been an honest report, that there'll be massive things for him to learn.
Yeah, well, that was my last question about this. See, you read the book, and I wasn't quite familiar with just how close Nucifora and Joe Schmidt had been, and like Nucifora was the head coach when they were at the Blues, and brought him to work with the Blues. So they obviously know each other unbelievably well. It's not just Joe Schmidt's World Cup. It was David Nucifora's World Cup. This was his full cycle where he'd had full control over where everybody went, including the Joey Carberry stuff in the middle of it, and everybody else, Simon Zebo, all that kind of stuff. That's where the book stops with Nucifora in terms of the contracts and stuff. He isn't the only person doing this report, but it's his report. There is somebody else. Murray Kinsella had a line in his piece in the 42 during the week that there was outside people involved, and that was the first time I'd seen that. So it's good to hear. But I'd just be a little bit concerned that if you're doing a report on yourself, which is essentially what the IRFU were doing, it's like, well, we were great, it's everything. Just got a bit unlucky with a few things.
Yeah, and I guess it's really important who the individual is that's speaking to the players, because, and it's difficult from a player perspective, and unless your next step is retirement, how truthful can you really be with the knowledge that maybe some of that information, even though it's meant to be anonymous, might eke its way back into the powers that be. So would you be willing to, and also there's a bit of loyalty as well, but for full not transparency, but for full honesty, I think you've got to try and find someone that the players trust, that a key individual that the players would trust, that they know would have anonymity and would know that he's there to protect them, but also to better the IRFU for 2023. And I don't know the personnel involved, but if it's someone from the outside, I don't know if the players would have 100% trust in that.
Yeah. How could you? Like, ultimately, if you say the wrong thing, you're concerned that your next contract isn't going to be as good as it could be, or that you might have to leave because something along the way gets poisoned. And look, I don't know, did you guys have a review after every World Cup?
Yeah, I remember the review after 2007, predominantly because it was such a disaster, and it was the first time they brought out, I can't remember the name of the company or the name of it, the report. It should jump out at me.
It wasn't Genesis, was it?
It was Genesis, that's exactly it was. Yeah, I should, it's certain things you shelve to the back of your memory.
Yeah, I'm not remembering this.
But yeah, and we got a version of it ourselves. I'm sure we didn't get the whole truth in it, and all the details of it, but we got a version of it, and from the report. And then the knock-on effect was that meeting down in Enfield that Rob Kearney apparently did say, I don't feel as though the Munster players have shown the same spirit in the Irish jersey, which was, I have to say, an incredibly brave thing for a young guy to say, and I've lauded him about that in the past. That couldn't have been easy, and sometimes you have to break a few eggs along the way, and he definitely did that. Whether it was true or not, he rattled some people's cages in there, and it obviously worked well to our benefit because we went and won the Slam the following year. Yeah,
so you need that level of honesty if progress is going to happen. And I was bringing this back to the example of New Zealand and the national crisis that they had after they didn't win the World Cup, and the massive review they did, and they went into all sorts of detail, and they completely changed a load of stuff. And who knows? I mean, it's the next World Cup where they scrape over the line against France, who really should have had a penalty in the last minute, and the whole thing would have all been bollocks. So it's very slim margins, but there was at least a level of honesty they went into. I'm just not sure if we're going to get that this time, and that would be a missed opportunity.
Yeah, it would be, and I don't know. Like, what will we find out from the report ourselves?
Well, Nucifora will give a media briefing. He'll be like, "This is what's in my report. You can't see it." At the moment,
but I understand that they've got to hold a certain amount back. It can't be warts and all. This isn't an autobiography or something where you have to be careful about how much information you do share too, because you absolutely show vulnerability and you'll end up ripping individuals apart on the back of it. Particularly when some of them are still going to be involved in the coaching setup, and a lot of them are still going to be involved in the playing setup. So you can't do that. but it's the manner of which the information that they get, that they, whatever about they plan to tell us, but whether they get the whole story themselves and they, as a result, can adapt to, you know, into their programs or into the plan for the next 4 years. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Bundy Aki signed a new 3-year deal today. That's good.
Yeah, great news. Yeah, there was obviously question marks about big money signings, big money signing in France. But yeah, another 3-year contract for him. He's been very, very important, obviously, for the rebuild of Connacht the last season and a bit under Andy Friend as well. And yeah, he's their poster boy, isn't he? And yeah, that loyalty that he showed. You know, he obviously means business when it comes to, you know, more international honours as well. I think he would have run the gauntlet, wouldn't he, of going to France and testing what Andy Farrell's going to do on that overseas playing rule. You'd imagine they're going to keep steadfast on that. But anyway, he doesn't have to worry about that for 3 seasons.
Yeah, it's great news for Connacht with the new stand coming. Like, they need to keep their players. They've signed Marmion, they've signed him. They've got a clever recruitment policy of taking players who have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder and something to prove. It's good for the identity of the team. It's good for the identity of the supporters. Like, we need a strong Connacht if we're going to be serious about boosting the number of players where we've got proper depth.
Yeah, listen, why would you try and just forge your international team from 3 teams? If 4 teams are competing, it's hugely beneficial to Ireland if we've got 4 teams competing well. And if one falls off, not just Connacht, if Connacht, you know, emerge as, you know, 3rd or 2nd best team, it doesn't matter. We need 4 teams competing well for European and domestic honours, and getting into the European you know, Champions Cup each year in a perfect world, because that drives standards. And we don't have that many professional rugby players in Ireland. We've got 150, 160 professional rugby players. When you look at the numbers in France and England, we need that competition driven by teams excelling, and the best way for individuals to shine is in a team capacity of when their team is going well. Pretty hard to be a standout player in a team that's going backwards.
Yeah, you need to be Sergio Parise levels of brilliance, and that's very tricky. When you think about the changes from the last World Cup, like, in fairness, the fact that Ulster have largely Leinster pack, or at least 50% Leinster pack, and that one of Leinster's best out halves is in Munster, like, things have changed, and they definitely, that kind of thing has been broken. Now, I think there's probably some things you lose from that, but there's obviously, you gain playing minutes and you gain experience. So, look, I don't know.
Someone's always going to miss out on that, and it's Leinster at the moment, because it's their academy that's coming through that's really thriving, and that they have a surplus of players in certain positions where other provinces would jump at the opportunity to sign them up, and as a result they've been moved across. And it makes sense, because you look at the makeup of the IRFU and the organisation. You know, players are only ultimately sublet down to the provinces. They're the IRFU are the dictating force, and they have the power to be able to move players. You know, if a player digs their heels in and say, "I'm not going," you can't force them to move. But you know, players are loyal, but at the same time they want to play.
Yeah.
And that's the problem when you've got, you know, 2 top class, you know, international players in key positions. You know, there's potential other issues coming down the line. You look at someone like Andrew Porter and Tadhg Furlong, for instance. And no, tight head's slightly different, because you can do a 40-40 or a 50-30, and players might be happy with that. But a time comes where one player feels as though they're a starter rather than having 17 on their back, or 18 on their back, and that, you know, that tends to come to all players. So in many ways, they're nice headaches for the IRFU to have, but it's going to put the squeeze on the provincial teams that have those 2 competing players in.
Yeah, okay. Our rugby coverage is with thanks to Vodafone. Team of us, everyone in. We do want to talk about how the provinces have started. We might start by talking about Munster. They're obviously in action this evening against Edinburgh. A lot of sympathy around the place for JJ Hanrahan and the missed drop goal at the weekend, but ultimately he looks like he's someone who is finally coming to the level that we expected his luxurious talents to bring him to. Like, he played really well, so the drop goal he'll get over, and he'll score those next time. but the fact that he's actually controlling games and his passing is where it's supposed to be, that's more important in the long run, right?
Yeah, it is. I think JJ Hanrahan must have been licking his lips at the prospect of Stephen Larkham coming in by the way that we've seen Munster trying to evolve their game in the first. I didn't see a huge amount of them when I was in Japan, but since I've come back and watched them in the Pro 14 and then in 2 weeks in Europe, the way they're trying to play the game, and it feels as though they're close to kicking, and they butchered a couple of chances where it looked like tries were on in the first half against Racing last week, and a pass inside shoulder or a drop ball or an unforced error just cost them. Whereas a tighter game doesn't look as though it suits JJ Hanrahan's style.
Yeah.
He's a bit more of the Finn Russell mould. He's not your quintessential kicking 10. He wants to run with ball in hand. He's an attacking threat. He's a very good passer of the ball. His goal kicking now, he was flushing them in the game the other day. He missed one, and obviously he'd be really disappointed with the drop kick miss. But with Carberry out, he must be really enjoying his rugby, playing with that freedom to, it's an all-inclusive game that they're playing, which is kind of a throwaway from where they've been in the last number of years.
Yeah, is it not remarkable that they're able to change that style so quickly? Because I kind of thought this was going to take about a year to settle in, and everybody's have to write off this year essentially, which is very difficult to do when you've got players who are as mature as some of their best players are. You kind of don't want to waste any of their peak years, but straight away, change. This is what we're doing, and it's quite successful straight away.
Yeah, I think you could see that. You could see that in certain players in Leinster as well. When Stuart Lancaster came in, I think players that were not offloaders, were not passers, that struggled with vision, where they got the blinkers on, through repetition at training, through being picked up in video sessions, through analysis, through one-on-ones, all of a sudden saw the light. And that's why coaching, there's a real emphasis on coaching again, because you can change an older player. You can teach the old dog new tricks, and it's just through repetition. And it will take a little bit of time, and if they get through a full season of the way they're playing now, I think it would be a good result with that level of consistency, because you'd imagine in years 2 and 3 there'll be the next stage of evolution. And there's some talented footballers down there. You look at that back line. They can all play. Chris Farrell's a big unit, but he's soft hands. Scannell actually played really well at the weekend, carried the ball well, but has a good distribution game, other than dropping that one pass from O'Donoghue. And the wingers, are in hot form. Haley looked really good. So if you look at that back line, you want to give them opportunities. Yeah. And it's not just forwards, maul and scrum and win ruck ball. You've got to link back rows in particular. And other ball players in the team that they clearly have. We saw the pass from Lockman in the Ospreys game, where it was a 10-metre pass off his left hand, out in front. And the ironic thing was Farrell was the one that caught it, and then he stuck Conway a little bit on a 2-metre pass that gave him that kind of second-guessed him as to whether he should accelerate and get down the touchline. Yeah. So you look at that, there's capability in them. It's just about unlocking that, and that happens through repetition on the training park and not focusing on set piece the whole time, as some teams appear to have done. It's about trying to work that multi-phase, as we've seen with Leinster under Stuart Lancaster in particular the last few seasons.
You mentioned Lancaster there. We talked briefly about the Issa's comments with Joe. He said he hadn't seen them, so we showed him a bit of them, and he was saying he was a bit surprised about that, because they'd always practiced unstructured stuff back with Leinster, and that he'd continued to do that with Ireland. I guess it's about the level of impetus that you put behind it, or how much time you spend, that there's this perception that they didn't do as much unstructured stuff with Ireland.
Sorry, so I'm
Schmidt was in studio. Yeah.
Okay.
He was saying that he was surprised by Issa's comments, because with Leinster and Ireland, Schmidt was in charge, he had always done unstructured work.
Yeah, I don't know on the balance comparatively to Leinster in particular. What that balance looks
mostly
like.
Unstructured.
It seems to be 75-80% is unstructured. Yeah. And And yes, you still have to do your spotters with line-outs and make sure that you get that accuracy. And a lot of that is about hookers going on their day off and going and getting their darts right, and practicing that. But I don't think there's this. I got the impression or understanding that at times Ireland would practice, the first 3-4 phases of play, but ultimately it's phases 4 to 6 or 4 to 16. Sorry, not 4 to 6, 4 to 10 or 4 to 16 that are the important ones, because defences are so strong nowadays. They're so organised that it takes you a while to get into, multi-phase to then identify those mismatches or, for someone to get tired and to fall off a tackle.
Yeah.
So my understanding, and it's a long time since I've been in Ireland camp, so I can't speak for the more recent stuff, but I got the impression that there was less of a focus on multi-phase and still a focus on launch.
To go back to Leinster, they haven't quite clicked in terms of the away performance last week. A win in Europe away from home is great, but they probably expected going into that game to be a more straightforward match, and maybe.
I don't think so.
No?
Leon have won 6 from 6 at home. They've got a very impressive record there. Yeah, they lost a couple of times, 3 times last season in the Champions Cup. They haven't actually won a game in the Champions Cup in 8 now. So maybe we've a skewed vision or version of what the top 14, the home and away thing is all about, where teams almost are nearly throwing the towel in before they go. They send a second team for the away games, win your home game, pick off the occasional away win, and then you should be somewhere in the top 4 or top 6.
On the playoffs anyway.
Yeah, whereas, Leinster went over. It was a dogfight. They were, they're very physical. They had, Wisniewski at 10 kind of kicks the ball very well. They just tried to beat Leinster up, and it's interesting. I watched the last 2 weeks. Players are still targeting Johnny, still going after him, still trying to get cheap shots, late tackles after the ball's gone, and it must be frustrating from his perspective, knowing they're coming, because he still has the bravery to throw the pass and doesn't pull himself out of those collisions. But referees need to kind of step up to the plate a little bit as well. And in fairness, Luke Pearce did at the weekend and called a penalty for that cheap shot after his big hit on Carl Ferns. And there was one the previous week against Bennett, and the Bennett number 8 cleaved him out off the ball. So these things are going to continue to happen to Johnny Sexton. I suppose he just has to be ready for them.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate fact of life. Is that the type of thing that referees can do more about? Is that something that you kind of have to, if you were captain, would you be going over going, come on, that's a card, or you need to stop this?
It's hard for Johnny because he is captain and it's happening to him. So, I listened to Luke Pearce talking to Carl Ferns and the Leon Hooker, who was the one that was penalised in that conversation. You just have to trust that the referees and the TMOs now are going to see things. There's lots of cameras, even in games where there's only 6 or 9 angles. It's very hard to miss much, and a lot of the stuff is quite apparent. So you just put your trust and hope in referees, assistant referees, and the TMO that it will be picked up, and that when you do get hit off the ball, that it's not going to cost, but also it's not going to cost you your game.
Or a couple of months.
Yeah. So, but it's frustrating. It's frustrating. It's another aspect that he has to deal with. But it's an inadvertent compliment, isn't it? They realise the strength of the Leinster team with Johnny Sexton in. He makes them tick more than the other 10s. Same with Ireland.
And he's playing really well.
Playing very well, and
that must be frustrating for him too.
What is he, 34 now? And I heard him talk about, playing in 2023, in France, and he's such a good professional that I wouldn't be taking out a bet on him now. It seems like a bit of a stretch for 4 years' time, but I know that he's done a bit more research on Tom Brady and watched what's going on there, and he'll go the extra yard to make sure that he can continue to be an excellent pro. So
avocado ice cream,
a lot of it is to do with luck with injuries, but he was quick to admit that speed has never been his strong point, so it shouldn't affect him losing a yard of pace. But have to wait and see. I definitely think that he fancies the Lions in 2 years.
Yeah, well, he's certainly, his contract's still alive until the end of that anyway. Will Greenwood and Mike Catt, Cyril Farrell, Tiernan O'Halloran and Andy Friend are going to be part of our next roadshow in Galway on the 11th of December. Tickets are available for that now. How good was Will Greenwood to play with?
I didn't really get to play with him. I played with him.
You were on the tour.
I did, but I only played with him for 20 minutes, I think. Remember that New South Wales game in 2001 where Raj got the head boxed off him.
Right, yeah. He was in that game.
So Raj, I think Raj came on for Will.
It didn't go so well.
And then Johnny Wilkinson moved into the centre with me, and then Raj got the head digged off him. So yeah, he rolled his ankles. The two of us, I think at that point, were probably tipped to be the centre pairing for the tests.
Okay.
And then
Rob Henderson comes in.
So Rob Henderson then came in and we played together. So it was very good to play, to train with, and difficult to play against. He's very strong, long and rangy, good offload game, clever footballer. So yeah, I thought he was a really good 13.
You never played against Mike Catt, or did you?
Yeah, played against.
Yeah,
I played against Caddy a good few times.
Right.
Played with him on the 2001 Lions tour. He went home early, I think, with an ankle injury, a calf injury. So yeah, really good lad. Really, really, good guy. Again, reads the game very well. That England team in 03, being able to bring him on as that second distributor, but also that right foot left to complement Wilkinson's left foot. They used to love that.
So he would have come on as a 12, would he?
He always came on as a 12, right. Yeah. So
even though he's actually in out half, is he? No, or was he?
No, I think he'd probably be. I don't know what you'd have to ask him what he refers to himself as. Obviously he had the 15 stint in '95 when Jonah ran over him in the World Cup semi-final, and then he would have played 12 and 10. So I don't know. I would have always have associated him as a 12.
Right. I have no idea what to expect from him as the person who's responsible for our attack from this point forward. Like, I don't really know what to expect from him as what his philosophy is, how he's going to try and make space, and all that kind of stuff.
I think most coaches' philosophies lie around the type of player they were, and he was someone that was good at identifying where the space was, and he wasn't someone that tried to run through brick walls himself. So he got other people to do that for him, but also he had an ability to be able to use bigger players as decoys to then create space for other people. And he was a pretty selfless player. I think he read it well. He wasn't someone that looked at glory himself. He was happy enough to run those decoys himself and then link up with players outside him, and you look at the quality that they had. So I think it'll be reflective of him as a player, what we're going to see in the Irish team. I think the Italian team probably evolved, but we mightn't see that for a season or two. I think he's got a better, more skillful team in Ireland, and I think he'll be possibly less frustrated playing with us than he would have been with Italy because of some of the limitations with certain personnel that would have come in there. Yeah,
it'd be interesting to see too if he just has a completely different outlook on certain players who were out in the cold, who he just goes, that's exactly what I need from my 12 or my 13 or my 14 or 15.
And if you're on the periphery, you would absolutely encourage, change. You might have even thought we want to wholesale change Andy Farrell out, Simon Easterby out, and bring someone else in new and fresh things up. But I think you'll see a very different setup and a very different philosophy from Andy Farrell as well. I think the players, watching them, I don't think they enjoyed the way they were playing as much as they did previously. And I think they realised the need to evolve and to change as well. And I think the timing is here and now that we get to see that through Andy Farrell and obviously through Mike Catt.
All right, good stuff, Ryan. Thanks for that this week. Rugby coverage is with thanks to Vodafone. Team of us, everyone in.
Brian O'Driscoll on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in.